as societies progressed, the value placed on these rulers and the spiritual essence to them extended beyond their physical bodies. And this is very important. Civilizations like ancient Egypt held deep reverence for their leaders' bodies, leading to practices such as mummification, symbolizing their separation. Their bodies symbolize their separation from the collective spiritual world as a one that stood out. And this idea of a divinely ordained ruling class became entrenched in society and formed these hierarchies and class systems, which were determined basically by birth. And as populations grew, class division deepened, and there came to a point where if equality was not addressed, the collective power of the people would be able to overthrow the right of the kings. Because history has shown that when the collective becomes aware of its power, it can eclipse the authority of the individual. But every time this happens, the individual then buys off the secondary class to be able to make them more individualized, to empower them, to make them greater oppressors. And this dynamic has played out repeatedly throughout history. Rulers and upper classes have often attempted to co-opt and promote this individualism within the collective to maintain control by prevailing class divide. And in ancient Egypt, this basically happened with the royal class viewing their lives as divine and meticulously preparing for the afterlife, believing in a transition rather than death. And they needed safe passage into the spiritual world to do this, and it was facilitated by various items, jewels, luxury goods, but especially fermented items like sacred bread, beverages like different types of proto-beer and wine. And initially, this was exclusive to the elite. These practices, though, eventually spread to the secondary class, which altered the perception of life and death, which led to a shift in this collective consciousness, but only for a certain few, right? Only for this collective became a collective, but somewhat excluded. And this practice of honoring ancestors and ensuring their safe passage with these fermented offerings from the beer, barley, and wine, this marked this emergence of individualism among the secondary classes. And these individuals saw their lives as having meaning and envisioned themselves as well, just like the kings, as to having a distinct afterlife. And this shift, because of the need for these resources, it coincided with the rise of pretty much the very first peasant class, which was driven by the growing of this demand for wheat and barley, which was needed for afterlife rituals. And this is what happened through that, is like this effort, this collective effort to get this wheat and barley fostered mutual trust and support within communities as individuals recognized the collective responsibility of ensuring safe passage for the deceased. And this practice nurtured a sense of shared trust and belief in something greater than the individual, with communities uniting in the common goal to give safe passage to the dead. And through this cycle of individualism, followed by a return to the collective, this has occurred throughout history. The ruling class will promote individualism to prevent that collective uprising, that collective understanding, that collective class consciousness. But people eventually realize that the true fulfillment of individualism is attained with others through a collective framework which fosters social cohesion and mutual trust. And as a result, we see the rise of egalitarian social structures and spiritual collectivism rooted in this institutionalized need to provide safe passage to the deceased. And this illustrates how a practice initially centered on individual afterlife beliefs for kings evolved in the cornerstone of collective societal organization. But this cycle transcends this initial embrace of the collective as these egalitarian and collectivist structures solidify. They tend to inadvertently pave the way for novel forms of individualism. And this ironic shift arises when the foundational elements of this mutual trust and collective organization, which is originally conceived to enhance social unity, begins to be perceived as appendments to personal freedoms and autonomy. This leads to individuals echoing this chiefdom and aristocratic tendency of being the forebearers and seeking these avenues to express their distinctiveness from the group and their distinctive personal agency, which is often within against the framework of the initial collective intention and collective grouping. And so this resurgence of individualism typically manifests as either a critique or backlash against the prevailing collective norm, and it results in the use of social technologies and infrastructures that seemingly were designed for this to rationalize this community, this communal mechanism, is now paradoxically morphed into instruments of control and restriction. So that's quite interesting. This historical narrative seems to now spin in circles, with each collective phase unwittingly setting the stage for a future era of individualism, and then conversely, each era of self-expression, laying the groundwork for a return to communal values. And this perpetual cycle seemingly shapes and reshapes society in a never-ending dialectical process between a individual's material wants and needs back to the community's grouping together based on the organizing principle of love. And observing this endless cycle is probably, observing this, what seems to be this endless cycle of one and the other, this yin and yang, which seemingly, when you look at it, when you're trying to figure out where does this all come from, what is the meaning to all of this, it's very complicated and it's very frustrating. And historically, frustrating things drive people to drink.